Welcome to Kitchen Sink Dharma. Now it occurred to me over the last few days, with all this cold weather, just how comfortable our homes are. Because we've got central heating and we've got rugs and soft furniture and comfortable beds and things. So why would we ever want to venture outside? So for example, why do so many of us love to go camping? It's not nearly as comfortable as staying at home. And personally, I love camping, and for me it's about being outdoors. It's about hearing the rain pattering on the tent in the middle of the night, or waking up in the morning and just seeing the sunshine lighting up the side of the tent. And I just think it's lovely. Sound of the zips and the feeling of the hard ground and everything. And there might be somebody listening to this thinking it's their idea of hell. But for a lot of us, it's a way of getting closer to the earth. And I think we can all find ways of getting closer to the earth, closer to the ground, at least sometimes. I think there's something in us that wants to get back in touch with the earth. Like when we walk on the grass in bare feet, or if we sit on the beach with the sand between our toes. And of course, when we sit in meditation, we are using the support of the earth, and we can connect with the ground to stabilize ourselves. We can do that when we feel anxious or distracted. Touching the earth is usually possible. We can pretty much do it anywhere or any time. Unless we're up in an aeroplane, the ground is never far away from us, and it can hold us, it can stabilize us, and it can help to take us back to our emotional equilibrium. And when we engage in any kind of meditation practice, it really helps if we can start off calm and centered and grounded. And that's one of the reasons why the basic meditation posture involves being sat firmly on the ground, just rooted to the earth. And there's a well-known image of the Buddha, which you'll see in lots of statues and pictures, where he's sitting in meditation, and his left palm is upright on his lap, and his right hand is touching the ground, it's touching the earth. And according to the legend, when Gautama, the future Buddha-to-be, was sitting under the Bodhi tree, the demon Mara come along. He was determined to undermine him becoming enlightened. But of course, Gautama wanted to become awakened. He wanted to become enlightened. And Mara, the demon, personifies the opposite of enlightenment. He kind of represents the greed and the hatred and the delusion that's in all of us. And his job was to try and disrupt Gautama's meditation with threats and temptations and insinuations. So just before dawn, Mara asks him, "What gives you the right to occupy this seat of enlightenment? What gives you the right to be here when my spiritual accomplishments are greater than yours? Who's your witness?" And the Buddha-to-be replies, "Let the earth be my witness." And he extends his hand to touch the earth. And at that moment, the earth responds, "I am your witness." Mara and his armies vanish, and the morning star appears up in the sky. This moment of enlightenment is the whole basis for the Buddhist tradition. And when he reaches down and touches the ground, he's using it as a reference point for reality. You could think of it as grounding, earthing, like a cable. And he doesn't try and argue with Mara, he doesn't try and muster reasons and debate him. His awakening actually happens as a kind of energy shift in the body. And it's not through talk, it's not through intellectual insight. So the Buddha was said to have touched the earth like that at the very point of attaining enlightenment. And this is important, because in ancient India they saw air and fire as being the spiritual elements. Air and fire were the elements that represented perfection and transcendence. And the earth and water elements were seen as being lower. They were seen as being base. Earth represented the material realm, the sensory domain, if you like. It was also the element of stability and groundedness. And it represented the part of us that's still, that's receptive. So in this story, the Buddha doesn't leave the earth. He doesn't leave it behind. He doesn't transcend it. He doesn't discard materiality. He just grounds himself in it. And I think at some level, for all of us, we need that groundedness. We need that contact with the earth. That earthiness. And I think we forget that we need it sometimes, but we know that we need it. Robert A. Johnson, who's a Jungian analyst and author, tells a story actually about Marie Antoinette in 18th century France. So Marie Antoinette was becoming aware of the kind of life she was living. It was very rarefied. And he writes, probably no more stilted or mannered life had ever been lived than in the courts of the French monarchy, and the poor queen was caught in an endless round of artificiality. Beauty, grace, dignity and wealth were everywhere, but this was at the expense of ordinary earthy humanness. Marie Antoinette decided to import something peasant-like and earthy into her life, so she ordered a cow barn to be built at Versailles. The best architects of the realm were engaged, and a masterpiece was constructed, and the exquisite barn can still be seen at Versailles. The finest cows were imported from Switzerland, and the Queen went with her ladies-in-waiting to do the first milking. This was to be her touch with earthy femininity. At the last minute she decided this was far too messy an endeavour, and instructed her servants to do the milking. So that's from Robert Johnson. So at some level, I think Marie Antoinette wanted to connect with the ground. She wanted to connect with reality, but she turned away from it, turned away from the earth. And she decided she didn't want to engage with something as messy as milking. And she returned to this gilded prison that she lived in. This wonderful, beautiful, graceful life that she had that had no earthiness, because it was too uncomfortable for her. And I think sometimes we do the same if we're not careful. In our comfortable lives, I think this is such a powerful metaphor. We know what we need, but it's just too uncomfortable, so we turn away from it. And you might be familiar with the term spiritual bypassing. This is something that's been coined by someone called John Wellwood. Spiritual bypassing basically means using the spiritual path as a means of avoidance and repression, and having this fantasy that spirituality is somehow going to enable us to rise above the ground. And we can just leave everything behind us, leave uncertainty and suffering behind us. So spiritual bypass is a defense mechanism. It's another way of turning away from our experience. Because it can be hard to stay present to our feelings like shame and loneliness and anger and so on. But actually we're here to learn how to handle our emotions. We're not here to learn how to repress them. This path isn't about living in some perpetual state of bliss. It's about being in the present moment, whatever that happens to look like, and just being who you are and where you are. And maybe sometimes walking in your bare feet, maybe sometimes sleeping on the hard ground. So I think if we're really going to benefit from our practice, we have to be willing to engage with the earth as well as the sky. And we have to be open to the knowledge that one day we're going to return to the soil. And this means being grounded sometimes. It means not insulating ourselves. And yet in our culture it can be quite hard to live like that. We can be a bit like Marie Antoinette with her cows. We can be drawn to the idea but actually reluctant when it comes to the reality. And it's so easy with meditation just to push away the less glamorous experiences. But of course reality isn't something to run away from. And you might be familiar with the Satipatthana Sutta, which is one of the most famous teachings of the Buddha. It's the teaching on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And the first part of it addresses mindfulness of the body. The first foundation of mindfulness. One of the things that we're taught to meditate on is the 4 elements in the body. The earth, the water, the air and the fire. It doesn't mean that the body's literally made up of those 4 elements. It's just that they represent characteristics of the body. And earth represents solidity, hardness or softness. Water is fluidity and cohesion. Fire is heat or cold. And air is motion. And we're taught to be mindfully aware of those characteristics. And it's just a way of looking at our experience. We could think of it as a lens, as a teaching that's offered to help us to release suffering. And the Buddha also uses a metaphor of a butcher cutting up a cow in its various components, and please accept my apologies if you're a vegetarian. But it's this idea of dividing up our physical experience into its components just to free us up from any habitual views that we have about the body. And it's about starting to deconstruct the sense of having this unchanging, fixed, separate self, and just observing it in terms of these 4 elements. And earth in the body represents the more solid parts of our experience, and with the awareness of a body that feels solid, we've got no choice but to be present. And we can start by noticing the physical presence and weight of the body. You can probably feel it right now in the way it's connected to the ground. Just the feeling of the sitting bones pressing into a cushion, for example, or a seat. And the places where we experience ourselves as solid matter. And then, having noticed the earth element with us, we can start to sense into the earth element externally in the world around us, not just in us, but noticing what feels solid outside of ourselves. Maybe starting with the ground beneath us, we could maybe notice that the earth element outside of us is actually just the same as the earth element that's inside us, that makes up the human body. But above all, we stay present with the whole experience of being a body, being something solid, and often over time, the sense of solidity can change as we observe it. We might start to notice something else, some movement, some flow of energy, and some of the more subtle clues that there's a body and that there's life, the fluidity, the heat, the cold, the other elements. And we also, of course, start to experience change and impermanence through the body. Stillness and movement, earth and water, air and fire. And the body can actually offer a complete spiritual path. We can practice grounding and knowing and allowing, awakening the heart, seeing things as they really are. We can do all of this through the body, but not if we insulate ourselves from the part of our experience that's real, that's earthy. Not if we try and transcend that part of ourselves. Now, in my experience, the conscious mind doesn't have all the answers. We can't think our way out of this. The intellect doesn't have all the answers. So today's advice is this, that we listen to the body. The body has something important to say. We need to create some time to come down out of the thinking mind and into the body with some steadfastness. And we can do that with some love. And we can touch the ground like the Buddha did under the Bodhi tree. This is about more than just your connection with the earth. It's about the earth being part of you and you being part of the earth. So thank you for listening. And I hope to see you again in another episode of Kitchen Sink Dharma.